You are wrong, your grace, and every soul in this box knows it, and the difference between them and me is only that I am willing to say so. The words fell into the crimson hush of the ducal box at the very instant the great chandelier of the opera house was being winched down for its candles to be quenched to half, so that they landed in a pool of gathering dark. Elmore, Duke of Atherford, who had not been contradicted to his face by anyone under the rank of prince in 11 years, turned his head with the unhurried menace of a man who has never once had to hurry, and looked for the first time upon the woman who had dared it. She was nobody. That was his first thought. And it was not an unkind one, merely an accurate one, the reflexive appraisal of a man who had been taught the whole map of the world's precedents before he could ride, a gown 2 seasons old and cleverly remade, no jewels worth the name, and the particular upright stillness of a young woman who has been brought to the opera as a companion or a poor relation and knows she is there on sufferance. She stood at the back of the box beside old Lady Marin, whose companion she plainly was, and she had just told the Duke of Atherford that he was wrong before 6 people who would repeat it across London by morning, and she did not look away. I was not aware, Elmore said, in the low even voice that had ended careers, that I had invited debate. You did not invite it. You provoked it. You said that Signor Alboni sang the second act flat, and that the fault was hers, and that the management ought to be ashamed to charge London money for it. And it is not true. She sang it exactly as it is written, which is a half-tone lower than the score you are used to, because the composer revised it for her range last winter in Milan, and if you had troubled to read the new libretto rather than the old one you would know that the fault, your grace, if there is one, lies with a printer in Haymarket, and not with the finest contralto in Europe. I could not sit and hear a great artist slandered in a room full of people too frightened of you to correct it. So I have corrected it. You are welcome. There was in the box the particular silence of 6 people who have all stopped breathing at once. Lady Marin had gone the colour of tallow. The 2 gentlemen by the rail were studying the middle distance with the fervour of monks. And Elmore, Duke of Atherford, felt something happen in his chest that had not happened in so long that it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it he did not believe it, and then he believed it, and it was this. He was interested. You read Italian, he said. I read 4 languages, your grace, and I hear a 5th, which is more than most of the men who lecture me on any of them. She had not raised her voice. That was the thing he would think of after, that she had delivered the whole of it in the modest, level tone of a companion asked to fetch a shawl, and that the modesty of the delivery made the steel of the content twice as sharp. It is a small accomplishment and an unfashionable one. A woman is not supposed to know things. She is supposed to agree. I have never been able to manage the second part, which is why I am 29 and a companion, and why Lady Marin is even now composing the apology she will make to you the moment I am got out of the room. I am composing no such thing, said Lady Marin faintly, in the voice of a woman composing exactly such a thing. Elmore did not look at her. He was looking at the companion, and the companion was looking back, and on the stage far below Signor Alboni had begun the great area of the 3rd act. The one that emptied opera houses of their handkerchiefs, and neither the Duke nor the woman who had called him wrong spared it a single glance, which was, given what each of them privately felt about the music, the most remarkable thing that had happened in that box all evening. What is your name? He's Ismene Renshaw. Miss Renshaw. He turned the name over as a man turns a coin he has not seen the mint of. You have just done a thing that no one in London has done to me since the old King's Jubilee. You have told me, in public, that I am wrong, and worse, you have done it while being correct, which I find I mind a very great deal more. Are you not afraid of me? And here Ismene Renshaw did the thing that undid him, though it would be some weeks yet before he admitted to himself that it had undone him. She considered the question. She did not laugh it off, and she did not draw back from it, and she did not, God knew, flatter it. She considered it, honestly, the way a person considers a question that has been asked in good faith, and then she answered it in good faith. A little, she said. You have the power to make my situation very much worse than it is, and my situation is already not one I would wish upon a woman I disliked. If you choose to be offended, Lady Marin will feel obliged to dismiss me, because she cannot afford your displeasure, and she can very easily afford to replace me. And I will be on the street by Friday with a month's wages and no character, and I know all of this, and I said what I said anyway. So, yes, a little afraid. But there is a thing I have learned, Your Grace, in 29 years of being the sort of person other people are permitted to be careless of, and it is this: if I let the fear of what powerful people might do to me govern every word out of my mouth, then they will have taken from me the last thing I actually own, which is the truth as I see it, and I would rather starve owning it than dine having sold it. Signor Alboni sang the act as written. That is true. It was true before you disliked hearing it, and it is true now, and your displeasure cannot make it false, and I find I cannot pretend otherwise even to keep my place. It is a great inconvenience to me, this inability. I do not recommend it. The area ended. The house erupted, and Elmore, Duke of Atherford, sat in the roar of 2,000 people applauding a woman he had wrongly slandered, and looked at another woman who had corrected him for it at the risk of her bread, and understood that his evening, which had been the same evening he had spent for 11 grinding, glittering, deferential years, had just become a different evening, and that he did not want it to end. He should, he knew, be angry. 11 years of being the most feared man in 3 counties had built in him a set of responses to defiance as automatic as a flinch, and he waited for the old cold fury to arrive, the fury that closed like a gate and left men ruined on the wrong side of it. It did not come. In its place was that unfamiliar, faintly ridiculous heat under his ribs, the heat of a man who has been bored for a decade and has just, without warning, ceased to be. "Lady Marin," he said, and the old woman jumped. "You will not dismiss your companion. If you do, I shall take it very ill, and you have just spent a quarter of an hour informing this box how much you cannot afford my displeasure. So let us not pretend you will risk it to be rid of a woman who reads Italian. Miss Renshaw stays. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Your Grace," breathed Lady Marin, who understood nothing at all. "Good." He rose. He was very tall, and the box seemed smaller for it, and he crossed to where Ismene Renshaw stood by the curtain and looked down at her from close to, and she tilted her face up and held his eyes and did not retreat by so much as an inch, and he found the not retreating as astonishing as everything else about her. "Miss Renshaw, you have called me wrong tonight, and you were right to, and I am not accustomed to either half of that sentence, and I dislike them both. I expect I shall dislike them for some time. Nevertheless," he inclined his head, a fraction, the smallest bow the Duke of Atherford had given anyone in a decade, "you will hear from me. Is that a threat, Your Grace, or a promise?" "I have not yet decided," said the Duke, "and I find that I am looking forward to finding out, which alarms me more than anything you have said all evening. Good night." He left the box. He went down the great stair through a sea of people who parted before him as water parts before the prow of a ship, bowing, murmuring, calculating, and he did not see a single one of them, because he was seeing instead a poor companion in a made-over gown who had told him he was wrong and had been afraid and had said it anyway, and he was aware, as his carriage was called and the London rain came down on the flambeaux, of a single clear and unwelcome fact that would not be reasoned away, that in 11 years of being agreed with by everyone, he had forgotten entirely what it felt like to be interested, and that a woman he would in the ordinary way of things never have noticed had just, in the space of a third act, reminded him, and that he was not at all certain he forgave her for it. The rain came harder. The carriage rolled. And the Duke of Atherford, who had gone to the opera board and come away undone, sat in the dark and discovered that he was, for the first time in longer than he could remember, thinking about tomorrow. The note came on the second morning, not the first, and Elmore was aware, as he sealed it, that the delay had been a small act of cowardice dressed as strategy, that he had spent the whole of the first day telling himself he would not write at all, that a duke did not pursue a poor companion's conversation like a boy sending posies, that the matter was closed and beneath him and forgotten. He had told himself this over his solitary breakfast, and again over his solitary ride, and again, most unconvincingly of all, over his solitary dinner in the great cold dining-room of Atherford House, where the candles marched down a table laid for one, and by the following morning he had given it up as a lie not worth the labor of maintaining and had written the note. It was not, he flattered himself, a boy's note. It was 3 lines. It informed Miss Renshaw that the Duke of Atherford had, upon inquiry, established that Signora Alboni's area had indeed been revised for her range in Milan the previous winter, that Miss Renshaw had therefore been correct in every particular and himself wrong, and that he found he disliked being wrong slightly less than he disliked leaving an error uncorrected, and had accordingly corrected it. It closed by observing that he would be at the lending library in Hanover Square, 11 o'clock on Thursday, that the Italian catalogue there was said to be the best in London, and that if Miss Renshaw happened to find herself in Hanover Square at that hour, he would be interested to learn whether her opinion of the catalogue agreed with his. Since her opinions had so far shown a disobliging tendency to be right, he'd not sign it your servant. He could not quite bring himself to your servant. He signed it Atherford and sent it, and then spent the whole of Wednesday in a state of irritation he could not account for and would not examine. She came. That was the first surprise. He had told himself she would not, that a woman with any sense of self-preservation would read the note as the whim of a great man who would tire of the game within the week and leave her exposed, and would therefore stay prudently at Lady Marin's elbow, where a companion belonged. He had, he realized, been rather counting on her sense, and instead, at 11:04 on Thursday, Miss Ismene Renshaw walked into the lending library in Hanover Square in the same remade gown, with a book already under her arm that she was plainly returning, and found him among the Italian shelves, and did not curtsy any lower than civility strictly required, and said, "You were wrong about the catalogue too, I expect. Most people are. Show me." The second surprise was how much he enjoyed the next hour. They quarrelled the length of the Italian shelves and halfway down the French. She thought his taste in poetry sentimental, he thought hers severe. She defended a translator he despised on the grounds that the man had at least understood that a poem was a piece of music and not a piece of law, which was more than could be said, she added, for certain readers who counted a half-tone as a hanging matter. He defended the law of the thing on the grounds that a translator who took liberties with a master was a thief who had persuaded himself he was a collaborator, and she said that by that reckoning every lover was a thief, since love was nothing but the taking of liberties one had been given leave to take. And then she stopped, having heard the shape of what she had said a half-second after she had said it, and a faint colour came up her throat. And for one moment the quarrel guttered and something else showed underneath it, and Elmore, watching the colour, forgot entirely what point he had been about to make and had to be reminded of it, coldly by his own pride, which pointed out that a Duke of Atherford did not stand in a lending library forgetting his arguments because a companion had blushed. "You are staring, your grace," she said, recovering first, which he also minded. "It is considered ill-bred, I am told, though I confess the great have always seemed to me exempt from the rule. You may stare at whom you like. It is the rest of us who must keep our eyes down. I was not staring. I was constructing a reply." "You were staring and constructing nothing, and now you are lying about it, which is beneath a man of your parts, and I will tell you why I know. When you construct a reply, your left brow does a particular thing. It draws down so, at the inner corner, as though the reply were a heavy object you were lifting. It has been doing it all morning. It is quite your most human feature. I have grown rather fond of it in an hour. And it was not doing it just now. Just now you were merely looking at me, with no reply anywhere about you, which is the first time all morning you have been caught without one, and I find I am inordinately pleased to have caught you, and I shall not pretend otherwise, since pretending otherwise is the one accomplishment I have never mastered." Elmore, Duke of Atherford, discovered that he did not have a reply to that either. He had come to the library, he understood now, with a plan of a kind, a vague ducal notion of amusing himself, of collecting this odd sharp creature the way a man collects a curiosity, of enjoying for a season the novelty of being disagreed with, and then setting it back on its shelf when the novelty wore thin. He had not reckoned on being seen. He had spent 11 years being looked at, by tenants, by rivals, by the mothers of marriageable daughters who saw a coronet and 30,000 a year, and had never once seen the man wearing them, and he had grown so accustomed to the looking at that he had forgotten there was a difference between being looked at and being seen. Until a poor companion informed him, in a lending library, that his left brow was his most human feature and that she had grown fond of it, and he felt the difference land in him like a stone dropped down a long dry well, and heard, faintly, very far down, the splash. "Miss Renshaw," he said, and his voice was not quite as even as he would have wished. "May I ask you a question, and will you answer it as you answer everything, which is to say without the smallest regard for whether the answer is one I wish to hear? It is the only way I know how to answer. Ask. Why did you come today? You know what I am. You know what I could cost you. A wiser woman would have burned my note and stayed at Lady Marin's side and been safe. You came. Why?" She was quiet a moment, turning a slim volume in her hands, and when she answered she did not look up from it, and her voice had lost its edge and gone to something plainer and more careful, and it was the first time he had heard her sound like a woman choosing her words rather than firing them. "Because I am 29, she said, "and I have been safe my whole life, and safe has cost me everything that was worth having. Safe is a made-over gown and a seat below the salt and a lifetime of holding old women's shawls and agreeing with fools because disagreeing is a luxury I cannot afford. Safe is watching, always watching, other people be given the things I was too prudent to reach for. I have been so safe, Your Grace, that I have very nearly disappeared, and no one would have noticed the disappearing, because a companion is a piece of furniture that fetches things, and furniture does not have opinions. And it certainly does not walk into Hanover Square to quarrel about translators with a man who could ruin it. And then you sent me 3 lines admitting you were wrong, which I did not think a man of your rank had it in him to do, and I thought," she looked up at last, "I thought, here is a thing that is not safe. Here is a man who could cost me my bread, and who might also, just possibly, be the first person in 10 years to find me interesting rather than useful, and I decided that I have been prudent quite long enough, and that if the choice is between disappearing safely and being seen at some risk, then I will be seen and hang the risk, because a woman who has already lost everything worth having by being careful has, when you reckon it honestly, remarkably little left to lose. So I came. That is the whole of it. You wished it answered plainly. There it is plainly." The library was very quiet. Somewhere among the shelves a clerk shifted a ladder. Outside, the ordinary traffic of Hanover Square went by oblivious. And Ulmore stood among the poets he had been about to defend and looked at Ismene Renshaw and understood, with the particular cold lucidity that came to him in the moments that mattered, that he was in a very great deal of trouble, that this was not a curiosity to be enjoyed for a season and set back on its shelf, that the stone had gone too far down the well for that, and that the sensible course, the ducal course, the course 11 years of self-command commanded, was to bow now, and thank her for an instructive morning, and never write to her again. "Miss Renshaw," he heard himself say instead, "there is a concert of Signora Alboni's on Tuesday next, a private one, at Lady Cardigan's. I have the disposal of the box. Lady Marin will be invited. It will be entirely correct. There will be nothing in it for the gossips to sharpen their teeth on. I should like you to come, not as anyone's companion. As a person who will tell me, honestly and without the smallest regard for my feelings, whether the Signora sings the new act as written, or whether the printer in Haymarket has been at his mischief again." "Find," he said, and it cost him something to say it, and she saw that it cost him, and he saw her see it, that I do not much care to hear music any more with anyone who agrees with me. It has become insupportably dull. You have ruined it. I am holding you responsible, and I mean to go on holding you responsible for as many Tuesdays as you will consent to be held. Will you come?" And Ismene Renshaw, poor companion, 29 and done with being safe, looked up at the most feared man in 3 counties and gave him, for the first time, a smile that had no armour in it at all, a smile that was simply glad, and said, "I will come, Your Grace. And I will tell you the truth about the singing, and about your taste in poetry, and about your left brow, and about anything else you are unwise enough to ask me, for as many Tuesdays as you can bear it. You have been warned. You may still retreat with honour. I notice that you are not retreating." "No, said the Duke of Atherford, looking at her smile. "I am not." Lady Cardigan's music room was a long gilded gallery hung with the portraits of people who had been important enough in their day to be painted and forgotten thoroughly enough since to be sold with the house. And into it on Tuesday next came the whole of little world that mattered, the dowagers who ruled it, the rivals who envied it, the marriageable daughters who were paraded through it, and the Duke of Atherford, who owned a great deal of it and was feared by all of it. With a poor companion at his side whom no one could account for, and everyone had begun, within a quarter of an hour of her arrival, to discuss. He had known they would. He had weighed it coldly, in the days between the library and the concert. Had understood that to seat Ismene Renshaw in his box was to hang a target upon her, that the same society which flattered him to his face would set upon her the instant his back was turned. Would find the made-over gown and the want of family and the impertinence of her presence, and would sharpen all three into knives. He had weighed it, and he had done it anyway, and he was aware that the doing of it was itself a kind of declaration, and that he was not yet ready to examine what it declared. The knives came out over the interval, as he had known they would, and they came out where he could not immediately reach them, at the long table where the ices were served, into which Ismene had gone with old Lady Marin, while the Duke was detained at the far end of the gallery by the Marchioness of Wexford. A woman with a daughter to dispose of and the tenacity of a barnacle. He extricated himself as swiftly as courtesy allowed, which was not swiftly, and he came within earshot of the ice table in time to hear the voice of Mrs. Fanshawe, a handsome, poisonous woman whose whole consequence derived from her skill at diminishing others, saying in the carrying murmur perfected for exactly this purpose, "No family that anyone can discover, my dear, and that gown has been turned at least once. You can see the line of it under the arm, and one does wonder what a companion imagines she is about, sitting in Atherford's box as though she belonged there. He is amusing himself, of course. Men of his rank do. But she, poor creature, she appears actually to believe it means something, which is the saddest part and rather vulgar, and someone really ought, out of kindness, to warn her before she makes herself a byword." Elmore stopped. He was perhaps 6 feet away, screened by a knot of guests, and everything in him that had been bred to 11 years of cold command rose up ready to descend upon Mrs. Fanshawe like a portcullis, and he checked it, because he saw that Ismene had heard, that she had gone still with the ice untouched before her, and that whatever happened next, she must be permitted to meet it herself, because to have the Duke of Atherford charge to her rescue over the ices would prove Mrs. Fanshawe's every word and finish Ismene in that room forever. He had learned that much, at least, in a fortnight of her company, that the surest way to diminish her was to defend her, and that her dignity was a thing she had earned in a harder school than his, and would not thank him for the theft of. So he stood, and he watched, and he suffered, and he let her answer. Ismene set down her spoon. She turned unhurried to Mrs. Fanshawe, and she smiled, and the smile was the one with the armour back in it, the one he had watched her lay aside in the library, and he understood that she had put the armour on again for the world's benefit, and that it grieved him to see it. "How kind of you," Ismene said, "to think of warning me, and you are quite right about the gown. It has been turned. Twice, in fact, not once. You have a good eye. It is the gown of a woman who has had to make one good dress last 5 years, which is a circumstance you will never have to consider, and I do not begrudge you the exemption. But since you have been so generous with your warnings, permit me to be generous with mine, one poor creature to a great lady, out of the same kindness. You are right that a man of the Duke's rank is not to be believed when he pays attention to a woman of mine. I know it better than you can tell me. I have known it since I was a girl. I do not imagine it means anything, and I shall not be made a byword, because a byword is a woman who did not see the trap, and I see every trap in this room, Mrs. Fanshawe, including the one you are standing in. Because here is the thing you have not considered, in your kindness. The Duke of Atherford is standing just behind that group by the pillar, and has been for the last minute, and has heard every word you have said, and is even now deciding what he thinks of a woman who savages a companion at an ice table for the crime of being poor. I would not, were I you, have wished him to hear it. But you did wish it, you did not trouble to look, because it did not occur to you that anyone worth minding could be listening to a nobody like me. And that, madam, not my turn gown, is the vulgar thing in this conversation. Do enjoy the second half, the signora is in wonderful voice. And she picked up her spoon again and returned to her ice, and did not look to see whether the Duke was in fact behind the pillar. She had not known that he was. She had gambled it, on the strength of knowing he had been detained at that end of the room. She had thrown the die blind and let it fall where it would, and Mrs. Fanshawe turned the colour of a boiled lobster and looked at the pillar, and saw that the Duke of Atherford was indeed there, and had indeed heard, and was regarding her with an expression that ended. In the space of a single glance and without one word spoken, a career of social murder that had run unchecked for 15 years. Elmore came forward then, because now it was safe to, because she had won the field herself, and he came not as a rescuer, but as a man claiming the victor's side. He did not so much as glance at Mrs. Fanshawe. The not glancing was the whole of her sentence, and every soul at the table understood it. He offered Ismene his arm. Miss Renshaw, they are about to begin the second half, and you promised me the truth about the new act. Come and tell it to me. And then, lo, for her alone, as he led her away up the gallery through a silence that rang. That was the most magnificent thing I have witnessed in a decade, and I include in the reckoning a battle I once watched from a hill in Spain. You threw the die blind. You did not know I was there. No, she admitted, under her breath, and now that the danger was past he could feel her hand trembling on his sleeve, the only sign she gave. I did not know, I hoped. It was a very great gamble, and if I had lost it I should have been finished, and I knew that. And I threw it anyway, because I have discovered a thing about myself this fortnight, Your Grace, that I did not know before I met you, and it frightens me more than Mrs. Fanshawe ever could. She drew a breath. I have discovered that I would rather lose everything being myself than keep everything being safe, and that you are the one who taught me to feel the difference, and I am not at all sure I thank you for it, because safe was at least survivable, and this new recklessness you have woken in me, this is going to break my heart, Your Grace. I can see it coming the way I saw Mrs. Fanshawe coming, and I am walking toward it anyway. That is the truth about the second half. The signora has nothing to do with it. Elmore stopped in the middle of the gallery, in full view of the whole watching room, and he did not care who watched, which was itself a thing that had not happened to him in 11 years, and he looked down at the woman on his arm who had just told him, in a crowded room, that he was going to break her heart. And he said the only true thing he had, "Then we are matched, Miss Renshaw, for I can see it coming too. I have been able to see it coming since a third act a fortnight ago. And I find that I am walking toward it with you, as fast as ever I can, calling it, God help us both, the best decision I have made in a decade." He covered her trembling hand with his own, once, briefly, in front of everyone, a thing the Duke of Atherford had never done for any woman living. Now come and hear the music and tell me the truth about it, and let them talk. Let them all talk. I find I have stopped being able to hear them. They heard the second half side by side, and she told him the truth about it. The printer had indeed been at his mischief. The signora had covered the error like the genius she was. He had been wrong again, and he received the correction with a pleasure so plain that the whole room saw it, and by morning it was all over London that the Duke of Atherford had been seen to smile in public at a nobody with a turned gown, and that Mrs. Fanshawe had been cut, and that something was happening in that quarter that no one could account for and everyone meant to watch, and the watching, Elmore knew, would be the danger now, not the knives at the ice table, which Ismene could turn aside herself, but the slower, colder pressure of a world that would not permit the Duke of Atherford to love where he chose, and that would bring, in its own time and its own way, the reckoning she had already seen coming down the gallery toward them both. There was a Tuesday in November when the rain came down as though the sky had a grievance, and the concert Ismene had been promised was rained off. The soprano indisposed, the rooms shut, a footman sent round with regrets, and Elmore, arriving at Lady Marin's in his great dripping carriage to find the expedition cancelled, did a thing that scandalized Lady Marin and delighted her companion in equal measure. He proposed, instead, that they drive, nowhere in particular, simply drive through the streaming grey streets in a warm closed carriage and talk, since talking had become, he said, the thing he came for, and the music merely the excuse, and he saw no reason a little rain should rob him of the substance for want of the pretext. Lady Marin, who was old and comfortable and disliked the wet, was persuaded with almost no difficulty at all to remain by her fire and lend her companion the carriage, and the Duke's own word of honour as chaperone enough for a drive in the rain. Which tells one a good deal about how far matters had already travelled, and how thoroughly the Duke of Atherford's word had come, in that house, to be trusted. And so it was that Ismene Renshaw found herself alone with him in the close warm dark of the moving carriage, the rain drumming on the roof and streaming down the glass and turning the whole of London to a smear of grey and lamplight, and it was there, screened by the weather from the world, that they told each other the things that the concert boxes and lending libraries had never quite had room for. He asked her, at last, the question he had been circling for a month and never put, how she had come to it. How a woman who read 4 languages and heard a 5th, who carried herself like the daughter of a great house, had come to be 29 and a companion in a mean street, holding an old woman's shawls, she told him. She did not dress it up and she did not beg his pity. She laid it on the table between them in the moving dark as she laid everything, a fact for 2 to look at. Her father had been a gentleman, not great, but genteel, a man of a small estate and a large library and a fatal want of any head for money. She had been raised to expect a modest security and a modest match. She had been taught the languages by a father who loved learning and had no son to pour it into. She had been, for 18 years, tolerably happy, and then her father had died, and the debts had come out of the walls like damp. More of them and larger than anyone had dreamed, and the small estate had gone to pay them, and the library, the beloved library, the languages made solid, had been sold in a single afternoon to a dealer from Bristol while she stood in the emptying room and watched her whole childhood carried out in crates. There had been a cousin who would have married her, after a decent enough man, a clergyman with a living, and it would have been safe, and she had refused him. Why? Elmore asked in the dark. Because I did not love him, and he did not love me, and we both knew it, and he offered anyway, out of pity and duty, and I could see the whole of the life laid out, a correct and grateful and loveless life, 40 years of gratitude, which is the coldest thing a person can be asked to live on. And I had just watched my father's languages sold in crates, and I thought, I have lost everything else. I will not also sell the one thing left, which is the refusal to pretend a feeling I do not have. So I refused him. Everyone told me I was mad. A woman with nothing does not refuse a decent man with a living. But I could not do it. Elmore, the same affliction I have told you of, the inability to pretend, the tongue that will not agree with what it does not believe. It would not let me marry a man I did not love merely to be safe, even when safe was the only thing left to want. And so instead of a clergyman's grateful wife I became a companion, and I have held shawls for 11 years, and I have watched other people be given the things I was too honest to reach for. And I told myself it was pride, and I told myself it was folly, and I told myself, in the small hours, that I should have married the clergyman and been warm. And then I met a man at an opera who would rather be right than comfortable, and I understood, all at once, why I had refused the clergyman, and it was not pride, and it was not folly. It was that some part of me had been waiting, without any right to, without any reason to, for exactly this. For someone worth the refusing of all the safe things for. I did not know it had a shape until it walked into a concert box and slandered a soprano. But had been the shape of the thing I was keeping myself unspent for all along. The carriage rolled through the streaming dark. Elmore did not speak for a long moment, and when he did his voice had changed, gone to the low unguarded register she had heard only once or twice, in the deep places under the banter. I sold no library, he said. I have never wanted for a shilling in my life. And yet I think we were raised in the same cold house, you and I, only mine had gilding on it. You were taught to be safe by poverty. I was taught to be safe by rank, and both of us by different roads arrived at the same locked room, in which one keeps one's heart because to spend it is to be at the mercy of what one loves. You refused a clergyman rather than sell the last true thing. I refused everyone everything for 11 years rather than unlock the box and be, for one moment, in another person's power. We are the same, Ismin. That is what I've been unable to name since the opera and can name now, in a carriage, in the rain, where no one can hear me be human. We are two people who were taught that love is the door by which ruin enters, and who have each guarded that door alone for so long that we had forgotten there was anyone on the other side of it. And then he stopped, and she heard him take a breath, the Duke of Atherford, gathering his courage in the dark. And then there was, on the other side of the door there was you, telling me I was wrong about a soprano, and I have not been able, since, to remember why I wanted the door shut. The rain drummed, the lamplight ran on the glass, and in the close warm dark of the carriage, screened from the whole cruel appraising world by nothing more than weather, they sat with the truth of themselves bare between them, two guarded people who had each spent a life keeping a locked room, discovering that the rooms had all along been the same room, and that the door between them had been standing open since a third act in October, and neither had quaid to walk through it. "You should take me home," Ismin said at last, very softly, and did not mean it. And he knew she did not mean it, and neither of them moved to give the order, and the carriage rolled on through the rain, nowhere in particular, for another hour, because there are conversations that a warm dark and a drumming rain make possible, and that daylight and dry streets would never permit. And they had both waited too long and lost too much to safety to cut such a conversation short for the sake of a propriety that neither of them any longer believed in half so much as they believed in this. When at last he did set her down at Lady Marin's door, and handed her out into the rain under the shelter of a great umbrella held by a soaked and stoical footman, he kept her hand a moment longer than he needed to on the step, in the wet, and he said, "I have told you things tonight I have never told a living soul. I find I do not regret it, which frightens me, because regret has been my constant companion for 30 years, and its silence tonight is very loud. Ismin, whatever this is that is happening to us in carriages and lending libraries and concert boxes, I want you to know that I have stopped fighting it. I fought it for a month. I am done. I do not know yet what I am going to do about it, because it is impossible, and I am the Duke of Atherford, and there are 300 years with an opinion. But I have stopped fighting it, and I wanted you to know, tonight in the rain, before I lose my nerve and go back to being a monument. I have stopped fighting it. That is all. Good night." And he was gone into the streaming dark before she could answer, which was as well, because for once in her sharp-tongued life Ismin Renshaw had no answer ready, and stood on the step in the rain with her hand still warm from his and her heart going like a girl's, watching the red lamps of his carriage swim away into the grey, and understood that she had just been told, by the most guarded man in England, that he had surrendered, and that she had, without ever meaning to, without any right to hope for it, won the one heart in London that all the rank and beauty of the season had never been able to reach, and that the winning of it was going to be, exactly as she had foretold at the concert, the most dangerous and most wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. The Tuesdays became a season, and the season became a habit, and the habit became, though neither of them said the word aloud, a courtship, the strangest courtship London had seen in a generation, conducted in lending libraries and concert boxes, and, once the frost came, in the long bare picture gallery of Atherford House, where the Duke had taken to receiving Lady Marin and her companion to tea on the frank and paper-thin pretext that Lady Marin's rheumatism did better by his fires than her own. It was in that gallery, on an afternoon when Lady Marin had fallen frankly asleep in the warmth with her mouth open and her cap askew, that Elmore showed Ismin the thing he had never shown anyone. They had been walking the length of the portraits, and he had been naming them for her. The dead Atherfords in their ruffs and their armour and their court dress, dukes and duchesses stretching back 300 years in an unbroken chain of consequence, and she had listened and asked sharp questions, and at the end of the row she had stopped before the last two frames, which hung a little apart, and were more recent, and were of a man and a woman in the dress of 30 years gone, and she had looked at them a long moment, and then looked at him and said gently, "Without her armour, your mother and father, yes, they do not look happy." "No," he said, "they were not." And then, because it was her, because she had spent a season teaching him that a thing said plainly was a thing survived, he told her what he had never told a living soul, of a great marriage arranged for two great fortunes, of a mother who had wanted a man who loved her and had got instead a duke who did his duty, of a father who had believed to his marrow that a man in his position could not afford to love, that love was a weakness the great could not indulge, that a duke married for the line and got his heir, and kept his heart locked in a strong box where the world could not use it against him, of a house he had grown up in that was exactly as cold as this gallery, in which two people had lived out 40 correct and loveless years a corridor apart, and had raised a son to believe that this was what strength looked like, and had died both of them, without ever once, in his hearing, saying a warm word to the other or to him. I was taught, Elmore said, standing before his parents' portraits with the woman who had wrecked a decade of his composure, that the Duke of Atherford does not love, that it is a luxury my rank cannot afford, a door by which the world gets in, a strong box better kept locked. I believed it. I believed it so thoroughly that I did not even notice I was lonely. One does not notice the cold if one has never been warm, until a poor companion told me at an opera that I was wrong, and went on telling me I was wrong delightfully, insupportably, every Tuesday for a season. And I discovered somewhere in there that the strong box my father gave me had been standing open the whole time, and that I had simply never met anyone worth the risk of reaching into it, until now. I am telling you this, Ismin, in this cold gallery, under the eyes of two people who never once said such a thing to each other, because I do not intend to die a corridor apart from the person I loved the way they did. I have watched where that road ends. I am not taking it. I would rather take yours, the reckless one, the one that is going to break both our hearts, you said, the one we are walking toward as fast as we can. I would rather break my heart having reached into the box than keep it whole and locked and cold for 80 correct and empty years. There. That is the truest thing an Atherford has said in this gallery in 300 years, and I have said it to a companion in a turned gown, and I have never in my life been less ashamed of anything. Ismene did not answer at once. She was looking at him with her eyes very bright, and she reached up, slowly, giving him every moment to draw back, which he did not, and laid her palm against his jaw, against the hard, clean line of it, the first time she had touched him of her own will, and the touch went through the Duke of Atherford like a current through a wire. Elmore, she said, his name. His own name, for the first time, and it undid him as thoroughly as everything else about her had undone him. I am going to tell you something, and then I am going to take my hand away, because if I leave it there, I shall do something that will wake Lady Marin and finish us both. And I am not yet reckless enough for that, though I feel myself getting there by the hour. I love you. I have loved you since the library, when you admitted you were wrong in 3 lines, and I saw that under all that terrible ducal armour there was a man who would rather be right than comfortable, which is the rarest and dearest thing I know. I did not mean to. I told you at the concert it would break my heart, and I meant it, because I know what I am and I know what you are, and I know that the world between us is very wide and very cold and full of Mrs. Fanshaws and Marchionesses and 300 years of Atherfords who married for the line. But you have stood in front of your dead unhappy parents and told me you would rather break your heart than live as they did, and I find that I would rather break mine with you than keep it safe without you. And so here we are, 2 reckless people in a cold gallery in love, with every reason in the world against it. What in heaven's name are we going to do? Marry, said Elmore simply. There is nothing else to be done with it. I have thought about it for a month. I have looked at it from every side, as I look at everything, coldly in the small hours when the house is quiet and my father's voice is loudest, and every cold calculation ends in the same warm and impossible place, which is that I want you for my Duchess, Ismene Renshaw. Turn gown and no family and 4 languages and a tongue like a blade, and all, that I want to grow old in a house you have made warm, and quarrel with you about translators until we are 90, and be told I am wrong by the one person in England who has never once prayed to tell me. I am asking you to marry me. I know what it will cost. I know they will say I have run mad, that a duke of my line has thrown himself away on a companion, that you have entrapped me, that it cannot last. Let them say it. I have stopped being able to hear them. Marry me. And here, at the very summit of it, with the word I as plainly rising in her, Ismin did the thing that was truest to her, the thing that would cost her most, the thing that a lesser and a safer woman would never have done. She told him the truth that stood in the way. "I cannot answer you yet," she said, and took her hand from his jaw, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. "No, listen. Not because I do not want to. You know that I want to. I have just told you I love you, and I do not lie. It is my whole affliction. But if I say yes to you now, in this gallery, warm and reckless and swept off my feet, then in a year or 5 or 20, when the world has been as cruel as I know it will be, when they have called me an adventuress to my face 1,000 times, and to yours behind your back, when your family has closed against me and your friends have cooled and you have paid, in 100 small cold coins, for the recklessness of loving where you chose, in that year, Elmore, some part of you will wonder, in the small hours when your father's voice is loudest, whether you were entrapped after all, whether I saw a coronet and 30,000 a year and played my sharp tongue like a hand of cards. And I will not have it. I would rather lose you now, clean, than be doubted slowly for 40 years. So I am going to ask you to do a hard thing, the hardest, and it is this: go away. To Etherford for a month, to the cold house, with your father's voice, and be certain, not warm and certain and in a gallery with my hand on your face, but cold and certain, alone in the small hours, with every argument against me laid out plain. And if at the end of the month you are still certain, come back and ask me again, and I will say yes so fast it will frighten you. But be certain first. I need you to have chosen me coldly, or I will never be able to believe you chose me at all." Elmore looked at her for a long time, and Lady Marin snored gently in the warmth, and the dead unhappy Atherfords looked down from their frames, and he understood that she had just asked him for the one thing that no one in 11 years had ever required of him, which was to be doubted, to prove himself, to earn. And that she had asked for it not out of coldness, but out of the deepest love he had ever been offered, a love that cared more for the soundness of the thing than the speed of it, and that this, precisely this, was why he wanted her and no one else in the world. "You are the most maddening woman in England," he said, "and you are right, and I hate that you are right, and I will go." He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to it hard once. "A month. And Ismin, the certainty you are sending me away to find, I already have it, and a month in a cold house will only sharpen it. But I will go and sharpen it, because you have asked, and because I have learned to do what you ask when you are right, which is always, wait for me, 1 month. And then, God help this family's 300 years of caution, I am going to marry you." Atherford in winter was the coldest house in England, and Elmore had chosen it deliberately for the month of his testing, because if he was to be certain, he wished to be certain in the hardest place he knew, with every argument against him given its fullest voice, so that whatever conclusion survived the ordeal should be a conclusion he could trust to the end of his life. The house did its work. It had been built to overawe, and it overawed still. 300 rooms of grey stone above a grey lake under a grey sky. The beech avenue his mother had planted standing black and dripping down the mile of the approach, and within, the long cold galleries and the marching portraits, and the particular silence he had told Ismin of. The silence of a house that had never once been happy and had made a kind of grandeur out of not being. He walked it alone in the short days. He rode the estate in the failing afternoons. And in the long evenings he sat in his father's study, at his father's desk, and let his father's voice, which lived in that room as surely as the cold lived in the stone, say everything it had to say. It said a great deal. A duke does not belong to himself. The marriage is an office of the line. Love is the door by which ruin enters. Look at what your softness will cost you, the whispers, the cooling of every alliance your name depends upon, the daughters of your own order withdrawn, the slow diminishment of the consequence it took your fathers 3 centuries to build. All spent on a companion in a turned gown who will bring you nothing the line can use. And when you have spent it, when the glamour of the rebellion has worn thin and you are middle-aged and diminished and your friends embarrassed for you, some cold morning you will look at her across the breakfast table and you will wonder, you will not be able to help wondering, whether she loved you or your coronet, and the wondering will poison everything, as it poisoned nothing in my correct and loveless marriage. Because I never once gave a woman the power to make me wonder. I kept the box locked. I died a duke, whole and cold and undoubted. That is strength. That is what your fathers understood and you have forgotten. Lock the box. Come home to your order. Marry advantage and want nothing, and you will never be at anyone's mercy, and you will call it, as I called it, peace. His grandmother's letters came to reinforce the voice, one nearly every day in her strong old hand, saying the same things in a warmer idiom, which made them harder to dismiss because they came so plainly from love, love of him, love of the line, a genuine terror on his behalf. He read every one. He did not answer them, because Ismene had asked for silence and he had promised it, but he read them and he let them work on him, because to have hidden from them would have been to cheat the test. And the extraordinary thing, the thing he turned over and over in the cold study through the long nights, the thing that became by slow degrees the whole of his certainty, was that as the month wore on, the arguments did not weaken. He had half expected them to. He had thought perhaps that a fortnight of cold reflection would show him that his father's voice was merely fear-dressed wisdom, an old cowardice he could reason his way out of. It was not so simple. The arguments were real. The cost was real. His father had not been wrong about the cost. The world would be exactly as cruel as the voice promised. There would be whispers and coolings and diminishments. And yes, in some cold morning of some far year, a smaller man than he meant to be might indeed look across a table and wonder. All of it was true. The voice had never once lied about the price. It had only ever lied about one thing, and it took Elmore the better part of the month, alone in the cold, to put his finger on the single lie at the center of all that terrible sound truth. And when he found it not by reasoning, but by remembering, by sitting one night in the frozen study with his father's voice at its most persuasive and finding, rising unbidden against it. The sound of a woman's voice in a lending library saying that his left brow was his most human feature, and that she had grown fond of it in an hour. The sound of her in a gallery telling him she would rather break her heart with him than keep it safe without him. The sound of her in a carriage in the rain, laying the ruin of her whole young life on the table between them without a scrap of self-pity, and saying that she had kept herself unspent, without any right to, for exactly this. And against that remembered warmth the cold study fell suddenly entirely silent, and in the silence Elmore saw the lie at last, plain as a flaw in glass held up to the light. The lie was this, that the locked box was peace. It was not peace. He had lived in it 30 years, and it had never once been peace. It had been merely the absence of risk, which his father had taught him to mistake for peace, because his father had never known the difference, having never once risked anything of himself in his correct and undoubted life. His father had died whole and cold and unwondering, yes, and also alone, a corridor from a wife he had never permitted himself to need, having spent 70 years in perfect safety and never 1 hour in the warmth that safety cost him. That was not peace. That was a man who had been so afraid of being at another's mercy that he had died having never once been in anyone's care. And the voice that urged Elmore toward the same end called it strength, and it was not strength, it was the deepest cowardice Elmore had ever met. The more terrible for wearing all his life the face of wisdom, and he had nearly let it choose for him, as it had chosen for 4 generations of Atherfords who had all dull and cold and safe and unwarmed in the greatest house in England. He rose from his father's desk. It was very late, and the fire had died to embers, and the cold of the study had crept into his very bones, and he stood in it and understood that he was at last, certain, not warmly swept off his feet certain, as he had been in the gallery with her hand on his face, but coldly, hardly. After a month of the fullest arguments the enemy could muster, in exactly the terms she had demanded, he had let the voice speak its whole case. He had granted every point of the cost. And he had found, underneath the true and terrible price, the single lie that changed the entire reckoning. The safety his fathers died in was worth having. It was not. He would pay the price the voice promised, every penny of it, the whispers and the coolings and the diminishments. And he would count it cheap, because the alternative was to die as his father died, whole and cold and safe, having refused the one thing that could have made the great cold house worth the inheriting. "You were wrong," he said aloud, to the empty study, to the voice that lived in it, to 300 years of Atherfords who had locked the box and called it peace. "You were wrong about the one thing that mattered, and a companion in a turn gown was right, and I have known since a third act in October which of you I believed, and I have spent a month in your coldest house proving it to myself so that I might never doubt it, and it is proved. I am going to marry her, and I am going to be, for the first time in the history of this name, an Atherford who dies warm. The study did not answer. For the first time in his life, the voice in it had nothing to say. He had beaten it alone in the cold on its own ground and in its own coin, and the silence where it had been was the sweetest sound Elmore had ever heard. And it was the sound, he understood, of a strong box that had stood locked for 4 generations finally and forever, breaking open. He did not order the horses that night, though every fibre of him strained to. The month was not honestly done, and he would not cheat by so much as a day the test of a woman who had refused a clergyman rather than pretend a feeling she did not have. She deserved a certainty that had run its full course, and he would give it her to the last hour. But he counted the days after that, in the cold house that no longer had a voice to torment him, the way a prisoner counts the last of a sentence, and when the final morning came he was in the saddle before the household was well awake. Riding south through the black beech avenue toward London and the shabby street and the woman who had unlocked him, as fast as the winter roads would let him, carrying at last the cold hard certainty she had sent him to find, and the warmth it had brought, and the whole of a broken open heart that no Atherford before him had ever dared to carry out of that house into the light of day. The Dowager Duchess of Atherford came to Lady Marin's modest house in the second week of the month, unannounced, in a great black carriage that filled the little street with consequence and set the neighbours to their windows, and she came, she said, to see the companion. She was 80 years old and had buried a husband and a son and had ruled the family through both graves, and she was in her way, exactly what Elmore might become if the strong box stayed locked another 40 years, magnificent, cold, and entirely certain that the survival of the line was the only thing on earth that signified. She looked at Ismen the way a general looks at unfavourable ground, and she did not ask her to sit, and she came directly to the point, because she had not the time nor the inclination for anything else. "You have turned my grandson's head," she said. "I do not blame you for it. A clever woman with nothing must use what weapons she has, and you have used yours ably. I have made inquiries, and I am told you are genuinely clever, which is more than most of them are. So I will do you the courtesy of speaking to you as I would to a person of sense rather than a person of feeling. Atherford is the 4th Duke of his line. There have been Atherfords at that house for 300 years, through the Wars of the Roses and the Civil War and the madness of the last king, and every one of them understood a thing that my grandson, in his present affliction, has forgotten, that he does not belong to himself. He belongs to the name. His marriage is not his to spend on a sentiment. It is an office of the line, to be discharged for the line's advantage, as his father discharged it and his father before him. You know this. You are too clever not to know it. So I have come to make you an offer, one sensible woman to another, and I will make it once." She named a sum. It was a very large sum. It was more money than Ismene Renshaw had seen in the whole of her 29 careful years, more than a companion could earn in 10 lifetimes, enough to buy a small independence, a cottage, a modest security, the end of turned gowns and old women's shawls forever. "You will take that," the Dowager said, "and you will go abroad, I would suggest. The continent is cheap and far, and you will write my grandson one letter, which I will help you compose, telling him that on reflection you find you cannot face the life, that the disparity is too great. That you release him, he will grieve, young men do. He will recover as young men do, and he will marry a woman of his own order who understands the office, and the line will go on, and in 20 years he will thank God on his knees that a companion had the sense he lacked. That is the kind thing, Miss Renshaw. The kind thing and the sensible thing are, for once, the same thing. You have it in your power to save him from a folly he will spend 40 years paying for. A woman who truly loved him would do it. Well, you are said to be clever. Be clever now." And Ismen stood in Lady Marin's shabby parlour before the terrible old woman who held the whole weight of 300 years, and she felt the trap close, and she saw, with the awful clarity that had always been her gift and her curse, that it was not a wholly false trap, that there was a grain of dreadful truth in it, that a life with Elmore would cost him, that the world would be cruel, that some part of him might, in the cold small hours, come to count the cost and find her wanting. She had said as much to him herself in the gallery. The dowager had only put a price on the fear that already lived in her. You have described, Ismond said at last, very quietly, a kind of love I do not believe in. You have described love as an account to be balanced, his consequence against my happiness, the line's advantage against a sentiment, all of it to be added up in a ledger and the smaller sum sacrificed. And I will tell you, madam, one clever woman to another, that this is precisely the arithmetic that killed your son and his wife. I have seen their portraits. I have stood before them in the gallery. Your grandson showed me two people who lived 40 correct and loveless years a corridor apart and died without a warm word, because someone taught them that a duke cannot afford to love, that the line is the only thing that signifies, that the ledger must always balance in favor of the name. You taught them that, and it made a cold house and a lonely boy and a lock-strong box, and I would sooner die in a ditch than take your money and teach it to him all over again by leaving. You want me to prove I love him by breaking his heart cleanly for his own good. I will not. I will prove I love him by being worth the cost, by making that cold house warm, by giving that lonely man the one thing 300 years of advantageous marriages never gave a single Atherford, which is a wife who chose him and whom he chose freely, for no advantage to the line at all. Keep your money, madam. I am not for sale, and neither any longer is he. You may tell him I said so or not, as you please. But you will not buy me out of his life, because I am not in it for anything you could put a price on, and that is the one thing your whole 300 years has never learned how to reckon. The Dowager Duchess looked at her for a long, long moment, and something moved far back in the ancient eyes that might, in a warmer woman, have been the beginning of respect, and she gathered her sticks and rose, and at the door she paused. He is at Atherford, she said, in the cold house, being certain, as you sent him to be. I have written to him this fortnight. I have laid before him every argument I have laid before you and more. His father's voice was never far, and I have made myself its echo. I do not know, Miss Renshaw, which way he will come down. He is the strongest-willed man I have ever bred and the loneliest, and loneliness makes a man do foolish things and pride makes him undo them, and I have spent a fortnight reminding him of his pride. If he comes back to you, you will have won against 300 years, and I will not stand in your way again, for I do not fight lost battles. But if he does not come, if the cold house and his father's voice and an old woman's letters do their work, and the month ends in silence, then you will know that the arithmetic you despise was in him after all, deeper than your warmth could reach, and you will be glad in time that you did not build a life upon a man who could be argued out of you by his grandmother. Good day. She went. The great carriage rolled away and the neighbours came down from their windows, and Ismene sat in the shabby parlour in the sudden ringing quiet, and for the first time in the whole reckless season she was truly and simply afraid, not of Mrs. Fanshawe, not of the world's knives, but of silence. Of a month ending with no carriage in the street, no note, no Elmore, only the slow cold understanding that the strong box had swung shut after all and she had lost. The days went by. There was no letter. She had told him to be certain in silence, alone. And he was being exactly what she had asked him to be, and the very silence she had demanded became the instrument of her torment, for she could not tell in it whether he was steadily choosing her or steadily being argued away. And she could not write to ask without breaking the terms of the test she herself had set, and so she waited and held old Lady Maron's shawls and taught herself, as she had taught herself so many times before, not to want, this time, that she could not do it. That the season with Elmore had broken the old safe machinery past mending, that she had lost forever the companion's grey art of expecting nothing, and stood exposed in the full cold wind of hope with no armour left at all. The month wore to its end. On the last evening she sat at the parlour window as the light failed over the little street, watching the place where a carriage would come if a carriage were coming, and none came, and the lamplighter went by with his long pole waking the lamps one by one down the street, and still none came. And the dark drew down, and Ismene Renshaw understood, with the clarity that had never once spared her, that she had gambled everything on a reckless love and a hard test, and that the test had come back silence, and that the die she had thrown blind at the ice table she had thrown blind here, at the whole of her heart, and had lost. She rose from the window, She would not weep where Lady Marin might see. She had that much of the old armor left. She took up her candle to go up to her narrow room and begin in the morning the long grey business of teaching herself once more to want nothing. And it was in that moment, with her hand on the cold stair rail and her heart in ruins, that she heard faint and then not faint at all, coming fast down the little street in the dark, the sound of a carriage. He came in out of the dark with the rain on his shoulders and his hat in his hand. And he stood in the doorway of Lady Marin's shabby parlour, filling it entirely, the Duke of Atherford, and Ismond stood at the foot of the stairs with her candle guttering in the draught he had let in, and for a moment neither of them could speak at all. "You are late," she said at last, and her voice was not steady, and she did not care. The month ended at noon. "It is past 9 o'clock. Elmore, I had given you up. I have been at that window since 4, I thought. You told me to be certain," he said. "You told me to go to the cold house and be certain in silence, alone, with every argument against you laid out plain, and to come back only when I was sure. Cold, you said, not warm, and swept off my feet in a gallery with your hand on my face. And I have done exactly what you asked, to the letter, because you were right to ask it, and because I have learned to do what you ask when you are right. I did not write, though I wanted to write every hour, because you didn't ask for letters, you asked for certainty. And I did not come a day early, though I could have, though the horses were ready this last week, and I sat up 3 nights fighting a wish to order them put to, because the test was a month, and to come even a day early would have been to cheat it. To answer you warm again when you had asked me to answer you cold. I gave you the whole month, Ismene, every hour of it. I owed it to you. And I came the instant it was honestly done. The roads were bad, the last stage took twice its time, or I should have been at this door by 5 and spared you the window. I am sorry for the window. I am not sorry for the month. The month is the reason I can tell you what I am about to tell you and have you believe it." He set down his hat. He came into the room, and the candlelight found the change in his face. She saw it at once, with the eye that had always seen too much, the marks of a hard fortnight, the hollows, the look of a man who has walked a long way through his own coldest country and come out the far side. "My grandmother wrote to me," he said, "every day for 3 weeks. You have met her. You know the weight of her. She is 300 years with a voice. She laid before me every argument the world can make, the line, the office, the disparity, the certainty that I would come in time to count the cost and find it too high. And behind her voice was my father's, which I have heard in the small hours of that cold house my whole life, telling me that a duke does not love, that love is the door by which ruin enters, that the strong box is safer locked. I let them both speak, Ismene. That was the whole of the test, and I did not flinch it. I sat alone in the coldest house in England for a month and let the 2 most powerful voices of my blood tell me, without ceasing, that loving you would be the ruin of my line and the folly of my life, and I listened to every word coldly. In the dark, as you asked, and I weighed it all, and at the end of the month I found that I was certain, and the certainty was this." He took her hands, both of them, the guttering candle held awkwardly between, and he did not kneel, because he was too tall and the moment too plain for postures, but he bent his head to hers. "They are right about the cost," he said, "and wrong about everything that matters. It will cost me. The world will be cruel. My grandmother will grieve. There will be small cold coins to pay for 40 years. I have reckoned it all alone coldly, and it is a real reckoning, and I will not pretend to you it is not. But at the bottom of every column of that cold arithmetic there is one figure my father never once put in his, and it changes the whole sum, and it is this, that a life is not made warm by advantage. My parents had every advantage the line by and died a corridor apart in the cold. The office got its hair and gave the hair nothing but a locked box and a lonely house and a voice in the dark telling him to want nothing. I have had that life. I know to the penny what it is worth. And I would trade the whole of it, the certainty, the safety, the correct and loveless survival of it, for 1 year of quarrelling with you about translators in a house you have made warm. That is not a warm man swept off his feet, Ismene. That is the coldest, hardest, most solitary reckoning of my life, done alone in the small hours against the massed voices of 300 years, and it comes down every time cold and certain and unshakable, in exactly the same place. I want you, not for advantage. against all advantage. Freely, and knowing the cost, and choosing you over the whole weight of my name with my eyes wide open. That is the certainty you sent me to find. I have it. It is the truest thing I own. Now, will you have me? Ask me nothing more. There is nothing more to prove. I have proved it in the only currency you would accept, which was a month of cold silence and my father's voice. Will you marry me? And Ismene Renshaw, who had taught herself for 29 years to want nothing, and had unlearned it in a single reckless season, and had thought, an hour ago at a dark window, that the unlearning had cost her everything. Ismene set down the guttering candle on the stair, so that her hands were free, and she took the face of the Duke of Atherford between them, as she had done once in a cold gallery, and made herself stop, and this time she did not stop. Yes, she said. Yes, you maddening, magnificent, cold-reckoning man. Yes, 1,000 times, and so fast it frightens you, exactly as I promised. I sent you away to be certain, and you have come back more certain than any man in England. And you have done it the hard way, the honest way, the way that means I will never once, in 40 years, have to wonder whether you were argued into me or entrapped or swept. Because you were none of it. You chose me cold. You have just told me so with the marks of the choosing still on your face. Yes, I will marry you. I will make your cold house so warm your father's voice will not be able to find a corner to sound in. I will quarrel with you about translators until we are both 90 and toothless. I will tell you that you are wrong as often as you are wrong, which will be often, and I will be right, which will be maddening, and you will love me for it, which will serve you right, yes. Now, for the love of heaven, Elmore, we are betrothed. The month is honestly done. Lady Maren is asleep, and I have wanted to do this since a lending library in October, and the Duke of Atherford, who had not been contradicted to his face in 11 years, and had never in his life been happier to be interrupted, gathered the poor companion in the turned gown into his arms in the shabby parlour of a house in a mean street, and kissed her once thoroughly, and the candle burned on the stair. And 300 years of cold Atherfords looked on from wherever cold Atherfords go, and could not for once do a single thing about it. When at length they drew apart, breathless, her hands still fisted in the wet wool of his coat and his forehead resting against hers, he laughed, a unguarded, astonished sound that she suspected the Duke of Atherford had not made aloud in a decade, and said, "There will be a reckoning still. My grandmother, the world, they will not take it quietly, and I will not have you meet it alone as you met Mrs. Fanshawe. Whatever comes now, we meet it together, in the open, married as fast as the banns will allow, so that there is nothing left for them to prevent. Are you ready for that?" "It will not be a soft beginning, Elmore," said Ismene. "I threw a die blind an ice table, and I threw my whole heart blind at a dark window, and I have won both times against the odds tonight. I am not afraid of your grandmother. I am not afraid of the world. I have been afraid of exactly one thing this entire month, and it was silence, and it is over, because you are standing in this parlour dripping on Lady Maren's carpet with the marks of a cold choosing on your face. Let them come. Let all of them come. We will meet them together in the open, and we will win, because we have the one thing 300 years of advantageous Atherfords never once had between them, and it turns out to be worth more than the whole of the arithmetic. Now wake Lady Maren, gently, and tell her she is to have the honour of chaperoning a duchess, and let us begin." The banns were read 3 Sundays running, and between the first reading and the wedding there fell the fortnight in which all London, denied the power to prevent the thing, contented itself with the lesser pleasure of coming to stare at it, and Elmore, who had promised her they would meet the world together and in the open, kept the promise to the letter. He did not hide her away until the ring was safely on. He took her out, to the theatre, to the promenade, to a great crush of a ball at which half the room had come expressly to see the Duke of Atherford's companion carry herself as a duchess to be, and half had come hoping she would not. And he took her out on his arm in the open, before all of them, and let them look their fill. She had been afraid of it. She admitted as much to him in the carriage on the way to the first of these ordeals plainly, because plainness was her whole nature. It was one thing to be your quarrel in a lending library, Elmore, where no one could see. It is another to be your choice in a ballroom, where everyone can. At the ice table I had only to defend myself. Tonight I must be looked at as the thing you have chosen over the whole of your order, and be worth the looking, and I do not know that I can carry a room that has come to find me wanting. You carried Mrs. Fanshawe, he said, who had come to find you wanting, and you did it alone, with me forbidden to help. Tonight you do not do it alone. That is the whole of the difference, and it is the whole of the point. At the ice table I stood back and let you win the field yourself, because to defend you then was to diminish you. Tonight I do not stand back. Tonight I walk into the room with your hand on my arm, and I do not leave your side for an instant, and I look at every soul who looks at you in a way that informs them, without one word, exactly what I will think of anyone who is uncivil to the woman I am going to marry. You will not carry the room alone, Isman. We carry it together in the open, so that London understands from the first that there is no crack between us for it to work a wedge into. Let them look. Let them find you wanting if they dare. They will be finding the future Duchess of Atherford wanting to the face of the present Duke, and I promise you they have not the courage for it, not one of them. Take my arm, lift your chin. We go in together. And they went in together, and it was exactly as he had said. A room that will savage a defenseless companion has no stomach whatever for savaging a woman who enters on the arm of a duke who plainly adores her and plainly dares it to try. And London, which is above all things a coward in a crowd, looked and murmured, by ones and twos. Discovering which way the wind had set, began to bow. The Marchioness of Wexford, who had spent a season pursuing Elmore for her daughter, was among the first to come and be gracious, having the sense to see that graciousness was now the only road to the Atherford connection she still coveted. And Ismene received her with the cool, perfect courtesy that was becoming, evening by evening, the polished armor of a duchess rather than the makeshift shield of a companion, and Elmore watched her do it with a pride he took no trouble at all to hide. "You are enjoying this," she murmured to him between one bow and the next, half accusing, half astonished. "You are actually enjoying it. The staring, the murmuring. I am rigid with terror, and you are enjoying yourself." "I am enjoying," he said, "the sight of a room full of people who told me for a fortnight that I was throwing myself away, discovering one by one that they were wrong, and being obliged to be pleasant to the proof of it. I have been agreed with by these people for 11 years, Ismene. Tonight I am being proved wrong by my own happiness in front of every one of them, and they cannot say a word, and it is, I find, the single most satisfying evening of my life. You taught me to enjoy being wrong. I am merely applying the lesson at scale." He bent his head a fraction. "And I am enjoying, more than any of it, that you are afraid and are doing it anyway, exactly as you have done everything since the opera. That is the thing I fell in love with, you understand, not your cleverness, though it is considerable, and not your tongue, though God knows it is sharp. It was that you were afraid, that first night, and told me I was wrong anyway. It has always been the being afraid and doing it anyway. Most brave people are merely people who do not feel the fear. You feel every ounce of it, and you walk into the room regardless, and that is the only courage worth the name, and you have more of it than any soldier I commanded in Spain. Now smile at the Countess of Denbigh, who is bearing down upon us, and who was extremely rude about you at the opera, and who is about to be extremely gracious, and let us enjoy her discomfiture together in the open, as we mean to enjoy everything from now on." By the end of that fortnight the thing was, in the way of such things, accomplished. The world had looked, and had not dared, and had begun the swift reversal by which yesterday's scandal becomes tomorrow's ornament, and the wedding, when it came, was attended by a great many people who had privately sworn a month before that they would never countenance it, and who now would not for worlds have been seen to stay away. Ismene understood exactly what their attendance was worth, which was nothing, and received it with exactly the courtesy it deserved, which was perfect and cold, and Elmore, watching her navigate a room full of turned coats, with the serene competence of a woman who had never once in her life been able to afford illusions about people, thought that he had not merely married the woman he loved, but acquired into the bargain the shrewdest and clearest-eyed ally a duke beset by a treacherous world could possibly desire, and counted it one more item in the long column of things the cold arithmetic had never thought to reckon, and the warm accounting kept turning up, day after day, to his continual astonishment and delight. They were married 3 weeks later by banns, in the same parish church whose bells Ismene had heard all her poor careful years without once imagining they might ring for her, and the marriage was, as Elmore had promised, no soft beginning. London came not to celebrate, but to look, to appraise, to be able to say it had been there when the Duke of Atherford threw himself away, and Ismene walked up the aisle of that little church through a congregation half of which had come to sneer, in a gown that was new at last and very plain by her own choosing, and she did not falter, and she did not lower her eyes, and at the top of the aisle the Duke of Atherford turned to watch her come with an expression on his feared cold face that silenced, by the time she reached him, every whisper in the church, because it is one thing to call a match a folly in the abstract, and quite another to say it to the faces of two people looking at each other in that particular way, and even the cruelest of them found, when it came to it, that they could not. The Dowager Duchess came. That was the thing no one had expected. The thing that was just discussed in every drawing-room for a month after, that the terrible old woman who had ruled the line through 2 graves, who had gone in her own black carriage to buy the companion out of her grandson's life, came to the wedding and sat in the front pew on the family's side, and watched the whole of it with her ancient unreadable face, and at the end, in the vestry, before the register was scarcely dry, she asked to speak to the new Duchess of Atherford alone. Ismene went to her without fear as she had promised, and the old woman looked at her a long moment, and then she said, "I told you, when you refused my money, that I do not fight lost battles, and that if he came back to you I would not stand in your way again. He came back. I have kept men waiting on my favor for 60 years, Duchess, and I have never once been beaten by any of them, and you have beaten me, not with weapons I understand, which are consequence and patience and the long cold arithmetic of the line, but with something I spent my whole life teaching this family to do without, and which I begin to suspect at 80 we were the poorer for doing without. I watched him walk up that aisle just now. I have not seen an Atherford look at anything the way he looked at you since." She stopped, and something crossed the ancient face. "Since before I was mistress here, since before I taught them all to lock the box. I did that, you understand. The cold house you have inherited, the lonely boy you have married, I made them. I taught my son that a duke cannot afford to love, and he believed me, and he died a corridor from a wife who might have warmed him, and I told myself for 40 years that I had done right by the line." Her voice did not shake, but it had gone somewhere very old and very tired. "I am not certain tonight that I did. You said to me in that parlor that my arithmetic killed my son. It was an insolent thing to say to me, and no one has said an insolent thing to me in 30 years, and I have thought about it every day since, and I have concluded, Duchess, that it was insolent and also true, and that I am too old to go on preferring a comfortable lie to an insolent truth, so I will not stand in your way. More than that, I will stand at your back. London is a pack, and it will test you, and a Duchess the Dowager of Atherford visibly at her back is a Duchess London will not dare to savage, whatever it mutters behind its fans. You have my countenance. You did not ask for it. You would not have asked. That is precisely why you shall have it. Make his house warm, girl. It has been cold 300 years, and I helped to make it so, and I should like, before I die, to see one Atherford grow old warm. Now go back to your husband. He is watching the vestry door as though you might vanish through it, which is a thing I never once saw his grandfather do for me, and which I find I am glad, genuinely, unexpectedly glad, to have lived long enough to see." And so the reckoning Ismene had watched coming down the gallery toward them, the slow cold pressure of a world that would not permit the Duke of Atherford to love where he chose, broke not against the two of them, but against the one unlooked-for fact that the oldest and coldest guardian of the line had, at the very end of a long hard life, been moved by an insolent truth to change her mind, and with the Dowager Duchess of Atherford at the new Duchess's back, London discovered that it did not, after all, dare. The knives went back into their sheaths. Mrs. Fanshawe, who had spent 15 years unassailable, found herself quietly no longer invited anywhere that signified, which was the Dowager's doing and was never once acknowledged and was perfectly understood by all. And the Duke and Duchess of Atherford, who had every reason in the world against them, settled into beginning of a marriage that the same world had confidently predicted could not last a season, and proceeded, with great deliberateness and no apology whatsoever, to make it last a lifetime. The cold house learned warmth slowly, as cold houses do. Ismyn did not try to make it warm all at once, which would have been to fight its 300 years head-on and lose. She made it warm the way she did everything, patiently, a room at a time, a fire lit here and a window thrown open there. Until one winter evening Elmore came in from the estate and stood in the doorway of the long gallery, the very gallery where he had shown her his parents' unhappy portraits, and found it full of light and voices and the disorder of a life being lived, and realized that he could not remember any longer what the cold of it had felt like, and had to stand a moment in the doorway with his hand against the frame, while the understanding of his own happiness went through him like weather. She found him there. She always found him. It was one of the things he had married her for, that she saw him, that she had never once in their whole acquaintance failed to see him. "You are standing in a doorway wearing your most human expression," she said, coming to him, tucking her hand into his arm, the one with the left brow. "What is it?" "I was trying to remember," he said, "what this room used to feel like, and I find I cannot. You have driven it out entirely. There is not a cold corner left in it for my father's voice to sound in. You said you would do exactly that, in a parlor, the night I asked you, and I thought it a lovely thing to say and did not truly believe it could be done, and you have done it. And I am standing in my own gallery, unable to find the cold I lived in for 30 years. And I do not know what to do with a happiness this large, Ismyn. I was not raised to it. I have no arithmetic for it. It exceeds every column I know how to keep." "Then stop keeping columns," said the Duchess of Atherford, "and come and have your dinner, and quarrel with me about the poem I have been reading, which is sentimental, and which you will defend wrongly and I will demolish rightly, and we will both enjoy it enormously, and that, my darling, is what one does with a happiness too large for arithmetic. One does not reckon it. One lives in it a day at a time, until one has forgotten there was ever anything else." She reached up and touched his jaw, the old gesture, unhurried now, unafraid, a wife's gesture in a warm house. "You have paid the cost you reckoned in the cold. Now spend the rest of your life collecting what it bought, beginning with dinner. Come." It came only once, the old fear in the whole of their marriage, the wondering his father's voice had promised, the cold morning across the breakfast table, and because as it came only once, and because of what Ismyn did with it, it never came again. It was in the first winter of their marriage, and it came as such things do, not from any great cause, but from a small and poisoned one. There had been a dinner, and at the dinner a man who had known Elmore's father, a contemporary, a cold old lord of the same school, one of the last who still thought the locked box the whole of a duke's dignity, had said a thing to Elmore in the smoking room, quietly, in the tone of a friend performing a kindness, that a man in Elmore's position could not help, surely, sometimes wondering. That a clever woman who had risen so very far so very fast must have wanted a good deal to rise, that he meant nothing by it, of course, only that he would be less than a friend if he did not say what all the world was thinking. And Elmore had answered him coldly and correctly and turned the subject, and had thought no more of it, or had believed he thought no more of it, until the following morning, when he came down to breakfast and found his wife already at the table reading a letter and laughing at something in it. Warm and unguarded and entirely at home in the great house she had made warm, and there rose in him from nowhere, unbidden, unwanted, hateful, the smallest cold whisper of the thing the old lord had planted. How far she has risen, how much she must have wanted it. It lasted a second. It was gone almost before he knew it had come, drowned instantly in the plain daylight fact of her, of Ismyn, who had refused a clergyman and a fortune and had told his grandmother to keep her money. But it had come, the wondering, the exact cold wondering his father's voice had promised him across a frozen study a year before, and Elmore stood in the doorway of his own breakfast room stricken with a horror far larger than the whisper itself, the horror that his father had been right after all, that the poison was real, that he would spend 40 years fighting off small cold mornings like this one, that the locked box had been, in the end, the safer thing. Ismyn looked up from her letter, and she saw it. Of course she saw it. She had never once in their whole acquaintance failed to see him. It was the thing he had married her for. She saw the stricken look and the doorway and the second's shadow that had crossed him, and she set down her letter. And she did not pretend she had not seen, because pretending was the one accomplishment she had never mastered. "Someone has been at you," she said, not a question. "Last night. In the smoking room, I should think, where the old men go to do their kindest cruelties. Someone has told you to wonder about me." Her voice was very steady and very gentle, and it did not tremble, though her face had gone rather white. "Sit down, Elmore. Sit down and eat your breakfast. And I am going to say a thing to you once, and then we are never going to speak of it again, because it does not deserve the dignity of a second telling." He sat. He could not have done otherwise. There was in her, that morning, the same quiet, unanswerable authority with which she had once corrected a duke at an opera. "I cannot prove to you that I love you and not your coronet," she said. "That is the cruelty of what they plant in you, that it cannot be disproved, because any proof I offer, they will say I offer for advantage. If I am warm, I am scheming. If I am cold, I am ungrateful. There is no conduct on earth that a determined poison cannot read as evidence against me. So I will not try to prove it. I will only remind you of a thing you already know coldly. In the place where you keep the things you are certain of, you did not find me. I did not lay a snare in your path and wait for the great duke to blunder into it. You provoked a stranger in an opera box by slandering a soprano, and the stranger, who wanted nothing from you and expected never to see you again and stood to lose her very bread by it, told you that you were wrong. That is how it began, not with my wanting. With your being wrong and my being unable to keep silent about it at the risk of everything I had. A schemer, Elmore, a woman who wanted your coronet, would have agreed with you. That is the whole art of the fortune hunter, to agree, to flatter, to make herself pleasant and pliable and safe. I told you that you were wrong before 6 people who would repeat it by morning, knowing it might cost me my place, because I could not do otherwise. Does that sound to you like a woman angling for a duke? Or does it sound like exactly what it was, a woman who valued the truth above her own bread? And who has never once, in all the time you have known her, valued anything above the truth, including your feelings, including her own comfort, including the coronet your friends imagine she schemed for, and which I would hand back tomorrow without a pang if I could keep the man and lose the rank? She reached across the table and took his hand, the way she had first touched his jaw in a cold gallery, unafraid. That is the answer to the poison, and it is the only answer there is, and it is enough if you will let it be enough. I did not want a coronet. I wanted a man who would rather be right than comfortable, and I found him wearing one, and the coronet was an inconvenience I accepted for his sake, not a prize I schemed for. If they had made you a schoolmaster instead of a duke, I should have married you a year sooner, and with half the trouble. You know this. You knew it in a frozen study when you beat your father's voice. The old lord in the smoking room cannot plant anything in you that your own certainty cannot pull up by the root, if you will do the pulling, and I am asking you to do it, now this once, thoroughly, so that it need never be done again. Look at me. Am I a woman who wanted your rank? Or am I the woman who told your grandmother to keep her money and told you that you were wrong about a soprano, and has gone on telling you that you are wrong about everything for a year, and will go on telling you until we are 90? Which, Elmore? Cold and certain as you like to be. Which? And Elmore looked at her, at his wife, at the woman who had just met the one poison that could have blighted their whole marriage and drawn it in the open and pulled it up by the root before it could put out a single further thread. And he felt the cold whisper of the old lord's kindness wither and die in the plain warm daylight of her, and he understood that this, precisely this, was the answer his father had never had and never sought. That the cure for the wondering was not to lock the box so no woman could ever make you wonder, to marry a woman honest enough to face the wondering down in the open, over the breakfast things, and true enough that facing it down was easy, because there was nothing hidden in her for the poison to feed on. The woman who told me I was wrong about the soprano said, he said, and his voice was rough, and he turned her hand and pressed his mouth to it hard, once. That one. That is the only one there has ever been. Forgive me. It came exactly as he promised it would, and it frightened me more than anything has frightened me since the cold study, because for 1 second I thought he had been right about the cost after all. And you have shown me, in the space of a breakfast, that he was wrong about this too. As he was wrong about everything, that the wandering is not a life sentence but a single weed, and that it does not grow in a marriage where nothing is hidden, and that I married the one woman in England in whom nothing is hidden, and that I am therefore safe, not because I locked the box, but because I gave key to someone who will never once use it against me. It will not come again. I have pulled it up by the root, as you asked, and I have looked at the root, and there is nothing there. There never was. Only my father's voice, in a smoking room, wearing a stranger's face. He is silent now. You have silenced him again over the marmalade in your dressing gown, as you silence everything with the truth told plainly, without the smallest regard for my feelings. He laughed, unsteadily, and the last of the cold went out of the morning. God, I love you. Pour the coffee. Read me your letter. Tell me what you are laughing at. I want the whole ordinary warm remainder of this day, and every day after it, and I want it without a single locked room in it anywhere, forever. That, said Esmond, pouring the coffee, her own colour coming back, her eyes very bright, is the most sensible thing you have said since you conceded the soprano. It is a letter from your grandmother, and I am laughing because she has written 4 pages to inform me, in the severest possible language, that she has decided to spend Christmas here, and that she expects the house to be warm, and that she trusts I understand she means the temperature, and nothing whatsoever more sentimental than the temperature, and that if I repeat to anyone her observation, that she has been happier this last year than in the 60 before it, she will deny it to her grave. Your grandmother Elmore is thawing. It is the slowest thaw in the history of England, and she would sooner die than admit it, and it is one of the great joys of my life to watch it. Now drink your coffee. The weed is pulled. The day is ours. And you are still wrong about the soprano, and about the poem I read you last night, and I shall prove both before luncheon. It became, in the years that followed, a private tradition between them, and like most of the traditions of that marriage it began as a quarrel. Every season, when Signor Alboni came to London, the Duke and Duchess of Atherford went to hear her from the ducal box, the same box, high in its crimson dark, where a poor companion had once told the most feared man in 3 counties that he was wrong before 6 people who would repeat it by morning. And every season, without fail, they disagreed about the singing, and the disagreement was, by long custom, the truest expression of their happiness that either of them knew how to make. They went, one such evening, in the 5th year of their marriage, on a night when the house was very full and very grand, and half of London that had come to sneer at a wedding 5 years was now there in its finery, hoping to be noticed by the Duchess of Atherford, for that was how it had fallen out, exactly as the Dowager had foreseen. The pack that will savage a companion will fawn upon a duchess, and the same women who had whispered over the turned gown now begged for her good word and copied the plain style of her gowns, and repeated her sayings as their own. Ismene received all of it with the cool, perfect courtesy that had become, in 5 years, her signature and her armour and her quiet revenge, and Elmore watched her do it from the corner of his eye with a pride so large and so unhidden that it had itself become one of the things London remarked upon. That the Duke of Atherford, who had gone 30 years without a warm word for anyone, could not be in a room with his wife without the whole of his attention bending toward her like a compass toward the north. The opera that night was the one they had heard at Lady Cardigan's, the one with the revised 2nd act, and when the Signora came to the area that had begun it all, the area a poor companion had defended against a duke's slander at the risk of her bread, Elmore felt his wife go still beside him, and he knew that she was remembering, as he was remembering, and he turned his head to look at her in the crimson dark exactly as he had turned it 5 years before to look at the woman who had dared to contradict him. But it was not the same look, and they both knew it, and that was the whole of the difference between the man he had been and the man she had made. 5 years ago he had turned to appraise a nobody in a made-over gown, with the reflexive cold cartography of a man who knew the whole map of the world's precedents and could place any stranger on it at a glance. Now he turned to find the one fixed point on that entire map, the only face in a house of 2,000 that his eyes went to of their own accord the instant they were free, and he looked at her, the length of the box, in the gathering dark with the great voice pouring up from the stage, and he let her see the whole of what was in the look. Holding nothing back, the strong box not merely unlocked now but broken up for firewood years since and burned to keep a cold house warm. And Ismene, feeling the look, turned to meet it. There was no one else in the box that night. They had long since given up the pretense of company. And so there was nothing between them, across the small crimson dark, but 5 years of a marriage the world had sworn could not last, and the great area climbing, and the singled look that had begun everything and now, in a manner of speaking, contained everything. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying that the look did not say. It said, "I chose you cold, against 300 years, and I've never once regretted the choosing." It said, "You unlocked me." It said, "I would do the whole of it again, the opera and the library and the ice table, and the cold month and all of it, 1,000 times, for this, for the ordinary miracle of turning my head in the dark, and finding you already turned toward me." It said everything the Atherfords in their frozen frames had never once found the courage to say to one another in 300 correct and loveless years, and it said it in silence, in a single look, across the width of a box. While London sat below them in its finery, and had not the least idea that the greatest thing in the house that night was happening high in the crimson dark between a duke and the companion he had married, and would have paid a very great deal to understand it, and never could, the area ended. The house rose in its thunder, and the Duke of Atherford, under cover of the roar, leaned to his wife and said low, against her ear, "She sang it flat." "She did not sing it flat," said the Duchess of Atherford, without turning her head, her eyes bright and her mouth curving. "She sang it exactly as it is written. You are wrong, your grace, and every soul in this box knows it, and the difference between them and me is only that I am willing to say so." It was word for word what she had said to him 5 years before, and he had known she would say it, had led her to it on purpose, had spent the whole of the area waiting for the joy of it, and he laughed out loud in the ducal box, in front of a house still thundering its applause, the low, unguarded, astonished laugh that only she had ever drawn out of him and that all of London had learned. Over 5 years, to take as the surest sign that the Duke of Atherford was happy. "I have been wrong about that woman's singing for 5 years," he said, on purpose, every single season, "because being told I am wrong by you is the finest pleasure I know, and I would sooner lose the argument forever than lose the having of it. I concede the point, Duchess. I concede every point. I have been conceding points to you since a third act in this very house half a decade ago, and I mean to go on conceding them until I am 90 and toothless, exactly as you promised, and it is the best bargain I ever made, and I made a great many, and none of the others were worth a candle to it." "I know," said Ismene, and took his hand in the dark, in front of everyone, as he had once taken hers in a gallery in front of everyone. The two of them passed, all caring who watched. "I have always known. I knew it in a lending library when your left brow gave you away. Now hush, my love. She is about to begin the last act, and it is the one they revised in Milan, and I intend to tell you the truth about every note of it, and you are going to sit there and be wrong, and it is going to be the happiest hour of the entire week, as it always is." She lifted his hand and pressed it, once, to her cheek. "This is what it bought you, Elmore. The cold reckoning, the hard month, the whole cost you added up alone in the dark. It bought you a lifetime of being told you are wrong by someone who loves you. Was it worth the price?" The Duke of Atherford looked at his wife in the crimson dark. In the house where she had once dared to contradict him and thereby, without either of them knowing it, saved him from 300 years of cold, and he gave her the truest answer he had, which was the same one he had given her in a cold gallery and a shabby parlour and 100 warm evenings since, and would go on giving her, gladly, to the end of a long and noisy and thoroughly un-Atherford-like life. "Every penny," he said. "And I would pay it again tonight, and count myself, as I count myself now, the luckiest wrong man in England. Now tell me the truth about the singing, Ismene. I am listening. I have been listening since the first note you ever spoke to me. I never once stopped. And the lights went down, and the last act began, and high in the ducal box, the Duke of Atherford leaned close to hear his wife tell him, truthfully and without the smallest regard for his feelings, Everything he was getting wrong, and there was not in the whole of that great and glittering house a single soul as happy as the two of them, nor a warmth anywhere in it to equal the warmth of one cold heart that a poor companion had unlocked with a single look, and kept unlocked and filled for all the rest of their days.